Hi. This lecture today is in replacing the online meeting because no one attended the meeting. So the focus today is really looking at topics 10 and 11. So negotiating structural impediments and looking at training to become training and development for you and for your organisation to become culturally proficient. So the underlying themes today, and are important for Assessment 3, are to identify organisational subcultures and contexts, moving towards an inclusive, inclusionary institutional culture, which is appropriate for the 21st century. So this is really the intent of this unit and the intent of your text. So this involves moving from the individual, and we've talked a lot about individual and identity, to more of the collective societal leadership. So to more flexible structures and systemic approaches, and a real paradigm shift to move to an organisation that has diverse leader-member organisational exchange. And this is the ultimate of what we want to move to. And in doing so, we will be looking at attaining cultural fluency and proficiency for the individual and for the organisation. So cultural proficiency, moving beyond cultural competency. So I always like to use the cultural web, which is multidimensional and dialogic. I think it's a much better way of looking at and diagnosing culture than the traditional iceberg models and the symbols, rituals, artifacts, etc. So it's built on these different facets, and I want you to have a look at these in detail. The stories, symbols, rituals and routines, power structures, organisational structure and controls. So it really is reliant much more on a socially constructed nature of an organisation. So there are questions that you can ask yourself about the organisation, which will unlock what's going on. So the first thing is stories. What stories do people currently tell about your organisation? What reputation is communicated amongst your customers and other stakeholders? What do these stories say about what your organisation believes in? And what do employees talk about when they think of the history of the company? And what stories do they tell new people who join the company? So pause the video as you're going and respond to those. And what heroes, villains and mavericks appear in these stories? Very important from the leadership perspective. So stop and reflect. What are some of the stories that stand out for you, and what do they convey about your culture? Some more questions to ask about rituals and routines. What do customers expect when they walk in? What do employees expect? What would be immediately obvious if changed? What behaviour do these routines encourage? So I've got the coffee there. So is it a welcoming place where you can smell coffee, where you have breaks and you drink good coffee? That's one thing. When a new problem is encountered, what rules do people apply when they solve it? Or do they say, oh, we've always done it this way, let's maintain the status quo, etc. What core beliefs do these rituals reflect? So, what rituals stand out for you? Think about the rituals and the routines that you enact daily, weekly, etc. What you noticed when you first came into the organisation. So, symbols. Is company-specific jargon or language used? How well known and usable by all is this? So are you using a lot of acronyms? Where I facilitated the Leadership for Women program last week, and a lot of people started to use a lot of acronyms, and we were pulled up and said, can we put as one of our ways of working together in this workshop that we identify the acronyms? So universities are laden with acronyms. Think about the acronyms and the jargon that you use. Is it inclusive or exclusive for people? Are there any status symbols used? So where's that power kind of lying? What image is associated with your organisation? looking at this from the separate viewpoints of your clients or your customers and from staff, and you might like to ask them. Just looking at my watch here and turning it off. Stop and reflect. How do these symbols reinforce or provide a barrier to an inclusive cultural identity? Organisational structure. Is the structure flat or hierarchical, formal or informal, organic or mechanistic? So is it like a machine, or do things just emerge? Do people work in an emergent way? Is it kind of, it's like an open space and people do what they want to do and ideas, innovation, etc. flows and is fostered? Where are the formal lines of authority? Do structures encourage collaboration or competition? Are there informal lines? So that's your structure. Now your power structures, which think about the leadership as well. Who is the real power in the organisation? Is it with the leader or is it with a faction? Are there power elites in the organisation? What do these people believe in and champion within the organisation? Do you have in and out groups? Who makes or influences decisions? What stops things happening? How is this power used or abused? So I want you to stop and reflect. What do these structures indicate about your organisational culture and about the leadership? Finally, what do the answers to these questions suggest are the few, maybe, fundamental assumptions that are the cultural paradigm in your organisation? What are some examples of subcultures within your organisation? So you look at in-groups, out-groups, different teams, silos, etc. Does one subculture foster collaboration, whereas another is very rule-driven and very controlling and works like a machine? How do they provide a barometer for how your organisation values or does not value inclusive practice? When you're looking through these things, they are going to help you to identify some of those hidden biases and assumptions, hidden discrimination in your organisation that you may not have looked at before, which will assist you with your final assessment. So the diverse leader-member organisational exchange paradigm is where we're wanting to move to. This is made up of diverse leaders and members and training for them. It's made up of an organisational culture that is adaptable to external changes and with also being responsive to internal goals. It also reflects a societal culture of social justice and equity. So we're aware of what's going on in society and we want to work in a way that is for societal good. And it avoids bias and stereotypic expectations. So I want you to look at these tables, particularly the one on Ferdman, this one on Ferdman and Dean on page 192. And look at the different systems. So at the individual level of system, inclusive leadership practices are: we take responsibility for our own learning and actions, have trusted advisors from different identity groups from which we seek feedback. We recognise and explore your identities and cultural orientations. We expect to have your current assumptions challenged and invite these interactions. And be bold in addressing blatant and subtle actions of exclusion. So leadership it's okay to do that. I want you to really look at these in detail. And then at the level of the system, the relational level, from the individual, from you to me. Okay? The relationships. We seek opportunities to mentor others and be mentored. We accept different work styles and different behaviours. We recognise intergroup fault lines. We recognise existing and implicit norms, and we continually examine those and revise them to fit cultures and subcultures. With minimum bias, we provide tools and build skills to help diverse teams address conflict and value difference. We intentionally involve a wide range of people and include diverse perspectives, etc. And how do we go about doing this as well? So what practices resonated with you? What practices have you tried? What will you do differently or more of, having studied this unit and having looked at some of those things, those approaches? You may be already doing a lot of those. And what will you include in your essay as to what you're doing to overcome those barriers of hidden discrimination? And then we look at the organisational system. Look through all of these and see whether your organisation is doing some of these things. The reviewing of the practices and policies, the identification of structural racism, and really changing in visions and changing structures so that they are much more inclusive. Providing quality educational opportunities to intentionally build organisational knowledge and creating systems of accountability to hold leaders and employees responsible. So what is your organisation doing to create these practices? Then finally I'm going to just cover very briefly, and this was going to be quite a long lecture with interaction. So I apologise, it's a brief video. I have 15 minutes in these videos to get across the points. One of the models that I have used is the Courageous Conversations About Race model. I encourage you to look at this. There are 4 commitments in this model. Remain connected. Honesty is the best policy, so speak your truth, but with honesty, authenticity, and not in a blaming or bullying way. Discomfort is okay because discomfort is an opportunity to change. And it's a marathon, not a sprint. So take your time, have patience. You'll continually have to be doing it. And then there are 4 conditions. Always keep the spotlight on race. Connect through stories. So we're going back to the storytelling. Get people to share their stories of discrimination. Get people to share their identity stories. Make complexity your friend. So look at the complexity in the situation and acknowledge the whiteness and the privilege in your organisations. One other way of looking at this is using the Johari window. It's Johari because it was made by Joseph Luft and Harrington Ingham. So this is a really interesting exercise for you to do with your people and with your leaders. For them to actually identify, we have a public self, which is known to ourselves and to others. Then we have blind spots. Seeking feedback from others gives us more information about our blind spots. There are areas where we are unknown to others and we hide. That's their hidden self. So actually revealing more of yourself, telling more stories about yourself, seeking feedback and giving feedback to others reveals more of who you are and narrows that square. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to make more known to self and more known to others. The whole exercise in this. Then looking at your unconscious biases right underneath, doing some unconscious bias tests, really looking at what's happened over the last 12 months and looking at incidences, being more reflective, keeping a reflective journal. Self-reflection will rarefy that unconscious self as well. And then finally, some unconscious bias training. This one about professors is a particularly profound one. And it's an exercise where you ask these things and you get people to draw a picture of their 12-year-old self. This is a picture of Jean Lau Chim, who is a professor and not your regular professor. And then this is the reality of what professors are like. So if people draw male white professors, they're accurate. But it also makes you realise your unconscious bias. This is a definition of unconscious bias. Then I would urge you also to possibly look at taking the implicit bias test. Training in unconscious bias is very important in your organisation. Then to take these reflections as well for today's lecture. And that's it. Thank you very much.